The wind crawled across the desert plains like a restless spirit, sweeping through the brittle grass and whispering against the walls of an old wooden ranch. Samuel Hayes stood by the porch, his hat pulled low, watching the sky darken to a bruised shade of violet. A storm was coming, the kind that rolled in fast and mean, the kind that made men remember how small they truly were under the weight of the heavens. He spat dust from his mouth and set his gloves tighter around his hands. The smell of rain drifted faintly through the air, mixed with the tang of distant lightning. It had been another long day of mending fences and driving cattle back from the lower fields. The land never slept, and neither did a man who lived off it. But for Samuel, work was a comfort. It kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. He glanced toward the barn where his horses shifted restlessly, silhouettes moving behind the open slats. The sky rumbled again. He could feel the storm crawling closer, pressing against the horizon like a living thing. He turned back toward the house, small, plain, and too empty. The windows glowed faintly from the fire inside. He had built it years ago for a family that never came to be. Now it stood as quiet as a grave. Inside, the clock ticked slow and steady on the wall. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and sat by the table, the wood scarred from years of use. The chair across from him remained empty, as it always did. He sometimes caught himself looking at it, waiting for a voice that would never answer. When the first crack of thunder split the night, the horses cried out from the barn. He set his cup down and rose. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his lantern and rifle from the wall. The wind hit him hard as he stepped outside, tearing at his coat and hat. The rain began to fall. Thick, cold drops that stung his skin. Lightning flashed, cutting across the sky and bathing the land in ghostly light. He trudged through the mud toward the barn, boots sinking deep. The big doors banged against the frame as the storm howled. Samuel shoved them open and stepped inside. The lantern's glow wavered, throwing long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. The horses stamped and snorted nervously in their stalls. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Ain't nothing but thunder." Then he froze. There was another sound beneath the storm. The faint rustle of hay, quick and sharp, like someone breathing where they shouldn't be. He raised the lantern higher, the light trembling across the wooden beams. "Who's there?" he barked. No answer, just the wind slipping through the cracks in the boards. He moved closer, his rifle steady in his hand. The sound came again, behind the stack of hay bales near the far corner. Samuel's pulse quickened. He'd dealt with drifters before, boys running from the law or men too hungry to care whose land they crossed. But something about the silence after his shout felt different. Not defiant, not angry, frightened. "Come out," he said firmly. "Ain't no use hiding. I won't shoot unless you give me reason." Still nothing. He stepped around the bales, the lantern light spilling across the floor, and stopped dead in his tracks. Curled against the hay was not a thief or a ranch hand, but a woman. A young one. Her dress, what was left of it, was white, soaked through with rain and torn at the hem. Mud streaked her bare arms and the side of her face. She looked like she'd been dragged through miles of storm and sorrow. Her eyes were half open, glassy with exhaustion. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, his brow furrowing. "What in God's name?" She tried to speak, her lips trembling. "Please, don't." Her voice was barely a whisper before she swayed and collapsed forward. Samuel caught her just before she hit the ground, the lantern swinging wildly in his other hand. He stared down at her, breathing hard. She was cold, so cold he could feel it through her dress. The rainwater dripped from her tangled hair onto his arm. Her wrists were raw, as if from tight rope. He cursed softly under his breath, laying the lantern on a crate beside him. He laid her gently on a pile of hay, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. Her cheeks were pale, lips blue from the cold. "What kind of trouble you got yourself into, girl?" he murmured. She didn't answer. Her breathing came shallow and fast, then steadied a little. He looked her over, city make by the look of her. Fine lace, expensive stitching, though ruined now. A runaway wife, maybe. Or worse. Samuel glanced toward the barn doors. The storm outside was screaming. No one would be traveling through it unless they were desperate. He took a piece of rope from the wall and hesitated before tying one end loosely around her wrist, the other to a post nearby. Not tight enough to hurt, just enough to make sure she didn't wander off or steal from him when she woke. He'd seen enough tricks in his years to know better than to trust a stranger who appeared out of nowhere. Once done, he grabbed an old blanket from the tack room and covered her. She stirred slightly, curling into the warmth. The sight made something ache in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Pity, or maybe something quieter, harder to name. He sat back on his heels, rubbing his jaw. The rain hammered the roof, steady and merciless. He looked around the barn, the rows of tools, the saddles hanging from hooks, the horse watching him with calm, dark eyes. Everything familiar, everything safe, until now. Samuel reached for the lantern again, adjusting its wick. As he did, a small glint caught his eye. Something gold nestled in the hay near her hand. He frowned and picked it up. It was a ring, simple but beautiful, gold with a delicate engraving along the inside. He squinted in the light, reading the tiny letters. Clara Whitmore, 1876. He stared at it, the name echoing in his mind. A wedding ring, freshly made. The engraving was clean, unworn. She wasn't just some runaway, she was a bride. He turned to look at her again. Even through the dirt and torn silk, he could see traces of elegance. The fine shape of her hands, the soft curve of her jaw. A bride, alone in a storm, hiding in a stranger's barn. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Samuel stood slowly, the ring tight in his hand. "What the hell are you running from?" he whispered. The thunder answered for her, rolling across the plains with a sound like distant gunfire. He walked to the barn doors and looked out. Rain sheeted across the land, erasing the road and everything beyond it. No lantern lights, no riders, just darkness and storm. He shut the doors again and leaned against them, the rifle hanging loose at his side. The woman slept fitfully, mumbling something under her breath he couldn't make out. He caught only fragments. "Don't let him find me. Please." The ring. Samuel's grip tightened around the gold band. Whoever she was running from, it wasn't just the weather. He set the lantern beside her once more, its glow flickering softly across her face. The rain outside began to ease, the thunder rolling farther away into the distance. Inside, the barn smelled of wet earth and straw, of life and survival. He knelt one last time, making sure she was breathing steady. The rope lay slack across her wrist, harmless now. He stared at the ring again before slipping it into his pocket, uncertain why he kept it. Maybe for proof, maybe because part of him already knew her story mattered. As he rose to leave, she stirred faintly. Her voice was weak but clear this time. "Don't tell him." Samuel paused. "Tell who?" Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't answer. The next breath she took was deep, even, lost to sleep again. He looked down at her for a long while, the lamplight catching in her hair. The storm outside raged one last time before falling silent, leaving only the slow drip of rain from the eaves. He let out a breath, long and low, and finally spoke to the empty air. "Well, Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "looks like you picked the wrong barn to hide in." But his voice didn't carry the anger it might have once had. Instead, there was something almost gentle beneath it, something that surprised even him. He took one last glance at her before blowing out the lantern. The barn fell into darkness, save for the faint glow of dying embers from the forge in the corner. Samuel walked back toward the house, his boots echoing softly on the wooden boards. As he closed the door behind him, he could still feel the weight of the ring in his pocket, the cold metal warming slowly against his hand. He stood there in the quiet, listening to the last of the rain tapping on the windows. For the first time in years, his home didn't feel entirely empty. He poured another cup of coffee, but didn't drink it. His thoughts kept circling back to the barn, to the stranger sleeping in his hay. Who was she really? Why was she wearing a wedding dress in the middle of nowhere? And what kind of man would she fear so much she'd ride through a storm to escape him? The answers would come, he supposed. They always did in the West. sometimes slow, sometimes all at once. He set the cup down and looked out the window toward the barn. The clouds were breaking apart, letting slivers of moonlight spill across the wet earth. Somewhere in that light lay a story he hadn't asked for, and a woman who would change everything he thought he knew about loss and about love. The night held its breath, the wind quieted, and in the stillness, Samuel Hayes stood alone in his kitchen, staring at the dark horizon, the gold ring glinting faintly between his fingers. He didn't know it yet, but the storm had only just begun. Morning crept slow and silver over the plains, spilling light through the cracks of the barn. The storm had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and the soft hiss of drying grass. Inside, the horses stood quiet, tails flicking at flies. Samuel Hayes pushed the barn doors open, boots sinking into the damp ground. His shoulder ached from the night's work, but it wasn't the cattle he was thinking about. His gaze drifted to the far corner where the stranger still slept, half buried under the blanket he'd thrown over her. She looked smaller now in the daylight, fragile in a way that stirred something uneasy in him. Mud still streaked her dress, her hair tangled like spun copper against the hay. For a long moment he just stood there, the silence between them heavy as the air after rain. She stirred when the light touched her face, groaning softly. Samuel set the lantern aside and crouched near her, his rifle resting against his knee. Her eyes fluttered open, blue, bright even in their weariness, and when she saw him, she shrank back against the wall, clutching the blanket tight. "Take it easy," Samuel said, voice low. "You're safe here." Her lips trembled. "Where am I?" "My ranch. About a day's ride south of Santa Fe." "You came through the storm last night. Lucky you made it." She blinked, her gaze darting around the barn. When she saw the rope looped loosely around her wrist, she froze. Samuel raised a hand quickly. "It ain't tight, just meant to keep you from wandering till I knew who you were. You tied me up. You broke into my barn." He shot back, though his tone softened at her frightened look. "Now you got a name, miss?" She hesitated. Her throat worked as she swallowed, and then she whispered, "Clara. Clara Whitmore." The name matched the ring. Samuel nodded slowly, drawing the golden band from his pocket. "You dropped this." Her eyes widened, breath catching. "You found it?" She reached for it, then stopped, as if the thing burned her. Her hand fell back to her lap. "I don't want it," he frowned. "It's yours, isn't it?" "It used to be," she murmured, voice barely above the wind outside. Samuel studied her carefully. In the daylight, she looked nothing like the thieves or runaways he'd known. Her skin was pale beneath the dirt, hands soft but blistered from riding. The dress, torn though it was, had once been beautiful, lace around the collar, pearl buttons missing where fabric had ripped. Not the kind of woman who belonged in the wild country. He poured her some water from his canteen and handed it over. She drank greedily, spilling some down her chin. "Slow down," he said. "Ain't going anywhere." She coughed, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you." He leaned against a post, arms folded. "Mind telling me what you're running from?" Clara's eyes flicked to the ring again. She took a deep breath, voice shaking. "My wedding, or the man I was supposed to marry." Samuel's brows lifted. "That's so? A woman don't usually ride into a storm to get out of saying I do. He's not just any man." Her tone changed, tight, brittle, as though the words cut her throat on their way out. "Sheriff Boyd Latham. Maybe you've heard of him." Samuel stiffened. Everyone within 100 miles had heard the name. Latham was a lawman, sure, but with a temper that outpaced his badge. He'd made enemies fast, and more than one man had gone missing after crossing him. "Sheriff, huh?" Samuel said quietly. "That's a hell of a man to run from." Clara nodded, eyes distant. "My father arranged it, said it would keep our family safe. I didn't have a choice. Boyd wanted a wife for show, someone to stand beside him and make him look like more than a brute with a gun. He doesn't love anyone but himself." She drew her knees to her chest, trembling despite the sunlight warming the barn. "He said he'd make me a queen. Instead, he made me feel like a prisoner. There were locks on my doors, guards outside my window." Yesterday morning, when they were fitting the veil, I saw a horse saddled by the servants' quarters. I took it, rode until the storm caught me." Samuel listened in silence. He'd known men like Latham before, men who hid cruelty behind law and charm. The kind that smiled in church and broke a man's ribs behind the saloon. "You must have come near 20 miles, he said. "Riding through that rain in a dress like that. You're lucky you're alive." She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I'd rather die out there than live with him." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind outside sighed through the cracks, stirring bits of hay that drifted through the air like dust motes. Samuel finally turned away, muttering, "Brave fool of a woman." "What?" "Nothing." He reached for a sack of oats, pouring some into a bucket for the horses. "You can stay till the road clears, then you'll need to move on. If the sheriff's looking, he won't stop till he finds you." Clara's voice wavered. "Will you tell him I was here?" Samuel paused, hand still on the bucket. "Depends. You plannin' to bring trouble to my door?" "No," she said quickly. "I won't cause any trouble. I can work, help with chores, whatever you need." He eyed her skeptically. "You ever mucked a stall before?" She hesitated. "Not exactly." "That's what I thought." He almost smiled, though he didn't let it reach his eyes. "We'll start with something easier. Can you cook?" "A little." "Then you'll earn your keep." She looked relieved, though her hands still shook as she tried to stand. Samuel moved forward instinctively, catching her arm before she stumbled. She tensed at his touch, but didn't pull away. Her skin was cold, soft as silk against his rough palms. "Easy," he said quietly. "You ain't got your strength back yet." Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long before he stepped back, clearing his throat. "There's water out back for washing. I'll find you some clean clothes." She nodded, brushing at her torn sleeve. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." He blinked. "How'd you know my name?" "It's on the sign out front," she said softly. "Hayes Ranch," he grunted. "Guess it is." By noon, the sky was clear again. Samuel kept himself busy with repairs, hammering new boards where the wind had torn through the fence. From the corner of his eye, he could see Clara by the well, scrubbing her arms clean, her damp hair falling in waves down her back. She wore an old shirt of his, too big by far, and a pair of trousers tied at the waist with rope. She looked awkward in them at first, but not out of place. There was a stubborn determination in the way she moved, even when she fumbled with the bucket or dropped the ladle. When she caught him glancing her way, she smiled faintly, a ghost of the woman she might have been before fear took root in her life. By evening, she'd insisted on cooking. Samuel had tried to stop her. "You don't owe me supper, miss." But she'd stood her ground. So he let her, sitting at the table as she fumbled with the skillet and beans. The smell wasn't half bad. She served it with shaking hands, watching his face nervously as he took the first bite. He chewed in silence, then said, "Could use salt." Her shoulders sagged. "Oh." "But it's better than I expected." She looked up, startled. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" He smirked. "You can take it that way if it helps." For the first time, a small laugh escaped her. It was soft, uncertain, but it warmed the room like sunlight after rain. They ate mostly in silence after that. When the dishes were done, Samuel fetched her a blanket and gestured toward the small cot by the fire. "You can sleep there tonight. It's warmer than the barn." "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "I ain't arguing." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He gave a curt nod and stepped outside for a smoke. The night air was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky. He thought about what she'd said, about Latham, about running. There was danger in keeping her here, that much he knew, but there was also something in her eyes he couldn't turn away from. A kind of courage, quiet but fierce. When he went back inside, she was already asleep, curled up under the blanket, her breathing slow and steady. The fire painted her face in gold and shadow. He stood there a long time, hat in his hands, before blowing out the lamp. As he turned toward his room, her voice came, barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Samuel." He paused, surprised she was awake. "Get some rest," he said. She smiled faintly. eyes still closed. "You sound like you care." He didn't answer, but as he lay down, staring at the ceiling, he knew the words had hit closer to truth than he'd like. The next morning, Clara was already up before sunrise, sweeping the floor with a broom that barely held together. Samuel found her humming softly to herself, her hair pulled back in a messy braid. "You're up early," he said. "I thought I'd help. You said I should earn my keep." He raised an eyebrow. "Ain't much keep to earn here, miss. Just chores and silence." "Then I'll take both," she said, smiling faintly. He tried not to smile back. The day stretched long and quiet. She followed him to the corral, learned how to feed the horses, even tried her hand at saddling one. When she dropped the girth strap and cursed under her breath, Samuel couldn't help but laugh, a low, warm sound that startled them both. By sunset, the world had softened around them. The heat of the day faded into a cool breeze. They stood side by side at the fence, watching the sky turn orange and rose. "Do you think he'll come for me?" Clara asked quietly. Samuel didn't answer right away. He looked toward the horizon where the distant road wound like a snake through the hills. "If he's the kind of man you say he is, yeah, he'll come," she nodded slowly. "And I'll be ready. You can't fight a man like that alone." "I'm not asking you to fight him," she said. "I just want to stop running." He turned toward her, the fading light catching the determination in her eyes. "You got more grit than I gave you credit for, and you're kinder than you pretend to be." He almost laughed again, shaking his head. "Don't spread that around. Folks might start expecting things." Clara smiled softly, then looked back at the sunset. "Maybe storms aren't all bad," she said after a while. "Sometimes they wash things clean." Samuel said nothing, but he couldn't help thinking that maybe, just maybe, she was right. The wind rose again across the plains, carrying the faint scent of rain and dust. Somewhere out there, danger was stirring, but for the first time in years, Samuel Hayes didn't feel alone in facing it. And in the quiet between them, something new began to take root. Something fragile, something real. The sun climbed slow over the ridgeline, casting long gold fingers across the open fields. The air was sweet with the scent of sage and morning dust, the kind of stillness that made the world feel untouched. Samuel Hayes stood by the corral, hat pulled low, watching the horizon. A week had passed since the storm, but the memory of it, and the woman it carried into his life, lingered like thunder that refused to fade. He heard her humming again. The tune drifted through the open barn doors, soft as wind chimes. Clara was inside, sweeping the stalls, strands of sunlight catching in her hair. She worked clumsily, but with determination, her borrowed shirt rolled up to the elbows, her face flushed with effort. She still moved like someone unused to freedom, each step uncertain, as though she feared the earth might shift beneath her feet. Samuel leaned on the fence rail, watching her for a moment before calling out. "You're hummin' again." She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Sorry. Habit, I suppose." "No need to apologize. Barn sounds better with it." She laughed quietly, brushing hair from her cheek. "You're just saying that because I'm doing your chores." "That, too." He turned back to the fence, but the ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. It was strange, the ease she brought into his days. For years, the ranch had been silent, only wind, tools, and his own thoughts. Now there was laughter between the walls, and it unsettled him almost as much as it soothed him. By midday, the air shimmered with heat. Clara joined him by the trough, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "How long have you been out here alone?" she asked. "Too long," he said. "You lose track of years when every day looks the same." "Doesn't it get lonely?" He shrugged. "The land talks if you listen close enough." She smiled. "And what does it say?" He looked at her, the corner of his mouth curving slightly. "Mostly tells me to work harder." She laughed again, but her eyes softened. "Maybe it says you deserve company, too." He didn't answer. He tipped his hat lower and went back to work, hammering a loose board into place. Her words dug deeper than he cared to admit. Later that afternoon, Clara carried a bucket to the chicken coop. The hens scattered around her boots as she scattered feed, giggling softly when one tried to perch on her skirt. Samuel stood at a distance, repairing the fence post near the gate, pretending not to watch her. But he couldn't help it. There was something about seeing her there, sunlight glinting off her hair, laughter spilling into the air. It stirred a feeling he thought he'd buried long ago. The peace didn't last. Just before sunset, as Samuel finished stacking bales of hay near the barn, he saw movement on the ridge. 2 riders, small against the horizon, heading west. Too far to see faces, but close enough that their dust trails caught the dying light. His body tensed instinctively. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the house. Clara was by the well, filling a bucket for the horses. "Yeah, see anyone passing near the creek earlier?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "No. Why?" 2 riders, head in, from town. Could be nothing, but he trailed off, scanning the hills again. Her voice lowered. "You think it's him?" "I don't know. Could be drovers. Could be worse." The fear that flashed in her eyes was quick, but real. She gripped the bucket tighter. "What should we do?" "Nothing yet. Keep to the barn tomorrow. Don't go near the road." She nodded, but he could see her trembling. He hated the look of it, the way fear seemed to steal the air from her lungs. He wanted to promise she was safe here, but he'd lived long enough to know the West didn't keep promises easy. That night, he sat on the porch while Clara lit the lamp inside. The sound of dishes clinking floated through the open window. He rolled a cigarette between his fingers but didn't light it. Instead, he found himself listening to her hum again, the same melody she'd carried since the morning. It was soft and steady, the kind of tune a person used to keep ghosts away. When he finally went inside, she was sitting by the fire, mending a tear in her borrowed shirt. "You look like a man who's thinking too loud," she said without looking up. He chuckled quietly. "Maybe I am." "Worried about the riders?" He nodded. "I've seen men like that before. The kind that sniff around for gossip or worse. Word travels fast in small towns." She set the shirt down and met his gaze. "You shouldn't get mixed up in my troubles." He leaned against the doorframe. "Too late for that. You're already under my roof. I never meant to stay this long." "I don't mind that you did," he said softly. Silence fell between them, thick but gentle. The fire cracked. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time, neither looked away. Finally, she spoke. "You said you lost someone before." He exhaled slowly. "My wife. Years back." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Wasn't your fault. She died bringing a child into the world. Neither made it through the night." Clara's eyes glistened. "That must have been hard." "It was." He paused, staring into the fire. "After that, I stopped talking to folks. Easier that way. You can't lose what you don't let in." She nodded slowly. "I used to think like that, too. Before Boyd." Her voice caught on his name. "I thought I could survive by keeping quiet, by pretending. But silence can kill you slower than any bullet." He looked at her then, really looked, saw the fight beneath her gentleness, the steel beneath the fear. She wasn't just a runaway, she was someone clawing her way back to life. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "You sound sure." "I am." He stood, turning toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow might bring trouble." She watched him leave, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. At dawn, the ranch was alive again. Chickens clucked, the wind stirred through the grass, and Samuel's boots thudded against the porch boards. Clara was already outside, a shawl around her shoulders, watching the sun break the horizon. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Dreams don't let me rest." He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Then stay awake. Dreams can't chase what don't stop moving." She smiled weakly at his attempt to lighten the mood, then sipped the bitter drink with a grimace. "That's terrible," he laughed. "That's coffee, sweetheart." The words slipped out before he realized it. He froze, but she didn't seem offended. Her cheeks flushed slightly, though she turned away to hide it. "Maybe I'll learn to like it," she murmured. He looked toward the hills again. The riders were gone, but a trail of dust marked where they'd passed. It unsettled him, a whisper of danger carried on the morning wind. They spent the day mending fences together. Clara proved clumsy with tools, but stubbornly refused to quit. Each time she stumbled, Samuel caught her arm before she fell. Each time she thanked him, her smile lingered a little longer. By afternoon, laughter returned to the ranch. She teased him for being too serious. He teased her for hitting her thumb more than the nail. When she cursed under her breath, he nearly dropped his hammer laughing. It felt strange and good, the sound of joy after years of silence. But as the sun dipped low, a shadow crossed the land again. Dust rose in the distance. 3 riders this time, coming slow along the road. Samuel stiffened. Inside, he ordered. Clara turned. "Samuel, go! Now!" She obeyed without argument, slipping into the barn while he fetched his rifle. He stood at the fence, waiting as the riders approached. When they drew close enough to see faces, he recognized one, Earl Tanner, a hand who'd quit his ranch 2 months back. The sight didn't ease him any. "Evenin', Hayes," Earl called out. "Heard you've been keeping company." "Depends who's askin'." Earl grinned, mean and crooked. "Sheriff's in town," says his bride ran off. "Funny thing. Someone said they seen a lady ridin' this way. Pretty, red hair, fancy dress. Ring a bell?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "You know better than to bring gossip here." Earl spat into the dirt. "Ain't gossip if it's true. Sheriff's payin', good for information. Then go earn it somewhere else." Earl's grin faded. "Careful, Hayes. Don't make me think you're hidden something." "Careful yourself," Samuel said evenly. "Ain't wise to call a man a liar on his own land." The 2 men locked eyes for a long moment. Then Earl laughed, pulling his reins. "Suit yourself. But if the sheriff comes riding this way, I won't be the one he thinks." He turned his horse and rode off, the other 2 following. When the dust settled, Samuel let out a slow breath and lowered the rifle. He turned toward the barn. Clara stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. "He knows," she whispered. "They'll tell him? Maybe. But I ain't letting them take you." Tears welled in her eyes. "You shouldn't risk yourself for me." "Too late for that," he said softly. She stared at him, her lips parting as if to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she crossed the space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were small, trembling but warm. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. He looked down at her, at the fear and fire tangled together in her gaze. "Maybe not, but you got it anyway." The wind rose again, carrying the faint echo of hooves from far off. Samuel glanced toward the hills, his gut tightening. Trouble was coming. He could feel it in the air. But for that moment, standing there with her hand in his, he didn't care. The sun dipped low, painting them both in amber light. The barn creaked, the world held still, and somewhere deep in the quiet, a promise unspoken settled between them, fragile, dangerous, and real. That night, Samuel sat by the fire while Clara mended a torn saddle strap. The storm lantern cast a soft glow on her face. "You're thinking again," she said gently. "Always am." "About the sheriff?" He nodded. "Men like him don't forgive. He'll come. Then I'll be ready." He smiled faintly. "You don't even know how to shoot proper." "Then teach me." He studied her a long moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow." When she looked up, their eyes met across the firelight. Something shifted between them. A wordless understanding, a tether neither could break. For a moment, the world outside didn't matter. The fear, the danger, the sheriff, all faded beneath the steady rhythm of 2 hearts daring to trust again. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the sound of distant thunder. Somewhere beyond the hills, fate was gathering its storm. But inside that small ranch house, under the fragile piece of flickering lamplight, Samuel Hayes and Clara Whitmore found something worth fighting for. And neither of them would ever be the same again. The wind had shifted again. It came from the east now, dry and restless, stirring dust devils across the empty plains. Samuel Hayes felt it before he saw the storm forming on the horizon. Not a storm of rain this time, but one made of men and iron. The air carried a taste of danger, the kind that crawled beneath the skin and refused to leave. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Clara first arrived. Days filled with quiet work, laughter that came easier than either expected, and nights spent by the fire where words slipped into silences that said more than either dared to. But even as peace wrapped itself around the ranch, a darker truth loomed in its shadow. Samuel could feel it, the way a wolf feels another's breath in the dark. The sheriff was coming. Clara sensed it too. Her hands trembled when she gathered eggs in the morning. Her eyes lingered too long on the road whenever a dust trail appeared in the distance. She'd begun sleeping lightly, waking at every creak of wood or whisper of wind against the windows. The ring she once refused to touch now hung from a string around her neck, hidden beneath her shirt, a ghost of a life she prayed would stay buried. That evening, Samuel found her standing at the porch, arms crossed against the chill. The sunset burned red, painting the land in a color that looked too much like blood. "You should eat," he said softly. "I can't," she whispered. He stepped beside her, resting his hand on the railing. "He'll come, Clara, but he ain't taking you." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "You can't fight him alone. He's got men, power, law on his side." "I've got this land," Samuel said, voice steady. "And I've got reason. That's enough." "Why?" she asked suddenly, tears gathering in her eyes. "Why risk everything for me?" He looked at her a long time before answering. "Because I ain't watching another good soul get taken by a bad man. Not again." The words hung heavy between them. She didn't ask what he meant, but she saw the truth of it in his eyes. The ghosts he carried, the pain that shaped him. Without another word, she turned and stepped into his arms. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then held her tight, feeling the tremor of her breath against his chest. They stood that way until the sun disappeared, swallowed by the desert night. The next morning came quiet but uneasy. The air was too still, the silence too deep. Even the horses felt it. They paced nervously in their stalls, ears flicking toward the road. Samuel saddled his mare before dawn, riding out to the ridge for a better view. From there, he could see far across the valley, and what he saw turned his stomach cold. A dust cloud, several riders, moving fast. He rode back hard, heart pounding. By the time he reached the barn, Clara was already outside, pale and shaking. "He's here?" she asked. "Not yet, but close. You'll hide in the root cellar, take food, water, and don't come out till I say." "I won't leave you," she said fiercely. He grabbed her shoulders. "You have to. This ain't bravery, Clara. It's suicide if you stay out here." Tears filled her eyes. "He'll kill you." "Maybe, but he won't touch you." He guided her to the small trapdoor beneath the kitchen floor. She hesitated only a moment before descending into the dim space below, her breath quick and shallow. He closed it gently, his hand lingering on the wood before stepping back. By midday, the riders arrived. 4 of them. The lead horse bore a tall man in a black duster, his badge glinting like a shard of ice in the sunlight. Sheriff Boyd Latham. Samuel stepped out to meet them, rifle resting casually against his arm. "Morning, Sheriff," he said evenly. Latham's gaze swept the ranch, cold and calculating. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it? Fine place you've got here. Shame about the storm damage. Must be a lot for one man to keep up." "I manage." "I imagine you do," the sheriff said, smiling thinly. "I'm looking for someone. My bride? She ran off a few weeks back. Thought maybe she passed through here." Samuel's face stayed blank. "Haven't seen anyone." The sheriff dismounted, boots crunching on dry dirt. "Funny, my men tell me otherwise. Said she was seen not far from your land. Red hair. Pretty thing. Maybe you forgot." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. "Don't know what you heard, but you're mistaken." Latham's eyes hardened. "I don't take kindly to liars, Hayes. You hand her over, or I'll tear this place apart till I find her." Samuel's voice dropped to a growl. "You'll do neither." The sheriff smiled again, slow and cruel. "You think that gun makes you brave? You think you can stand against the law? "I think a man stops being law when he hunts a woman like a dog," Samuel said. The sheriff's smile vanished. His hand dropped to his holster. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind, the breath, the space between heartbeats. Then, the world exploded. Latham drew first, but Samuel was faster. His rifle cracked, grazing the sheriff's shoulder. One of the deputies fired back, bullets shattering a window behind Samuel. The horses screamed and reared as dust filled the air. Clara heard the shots from below. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trembling. The sound of gunfire tore through her like lightning through bone. She couldn't stay hidden, not while Samuel was up there fighting for her. She pushed open the trap door, heart hammering. Smoke drifted through the kitchen, the smell of gunpowder thick and choking. She grabbed the pistol Samuel had left by the table and ran outside. The yard was chaos. 2 deputies circled from the left while the sheriff staggered near the barn, blood streaking his coat. Samuel crouched behind a water trough, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. "Samuel!" she cried. He turned, shock and fear flashing in his eyes. "Clara, get back inside!" But she didn't listen. She ran toward him just as one of the deputies aimed his gun. Samuel saw it too late. The man fired, but the shot went wide as Clara raised the pistol and fired back. The recoil nearly knocked her down, but the deputy fell with a cry. Samuel grabbed her, pulling her behind the trough. "Damn it, I told you to stay down!" "I couldn't," she sobbed. "Not while they were." Another bullet struck the trough, splintering wood. Samuel pulled her close, shielding her as he returned fire. One more deputy dropped. The last fled toward his horse, spooked and bleeding. The sheriff, clutching his arm, staggered to his feet. His face was twisted with fury. "You'll pay for this, Hayes. You'll hang for harboring my wife." "She ain't your wife," Samuel said coldly. "She's her own damn person." Latham raised his gun, but before he could fire, the sound of more horses thundered in the distance. Townsfolk, ranchers, farmers, men who'd heard the shots. They rode in fast, rifles ready. The sheriff's face blanched. He lowered his weapon slowly as half a dozen locals surrounded him. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "I am the law." "No," said old Bill Carter, spitting into the dirt. "You're a bully hiding behind a badge." The men disarmed the sheriff and his wounded deputy. One of them tied their hands with rope, while another fetched a wagon to haul them back to town. As they led Latham away, he turned one last time toward Samuel and Clara. "You think this ends here?" he snarled. "The law'll come for you both." Samuel stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "Then they can dig 2 graves while they're at it." "But you're done." The sheriff spat blood into the dirt and said nothing more. When the dust settled, the silence hit harder than the gunfire had. The townsfolk rode off, leaving Samuel and Clara alone amid the wreckage. Smoke curled from a bullet-scarred post. The trough leaked water that shimmered red in the sunlight. Samuel sank to his knees, breathing hard. Clara knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his shoulder where blood seeped through his shirt. "You're hit," she cried. "Just a scratch." His voice was hoarse, eyes heavy. "You're lying." He managed a faint smile. "Maybe a little." She tore a strip from her shirt and pressed it to the wound. Her hands shook, her tears falling onto his skin. "You could have died." He caught her wrist gently. "So could you." "I didn't care," she whispered. "Not if it meant losing you." He looked at her then, really looked. The way her hair clung to her face, the dirt smudged across her cheek, the fire still alive in her eyes despite everything. "You saved my life," he said softly. She shook her head. "You saved mine first." They stayed like that for a long time, the world shrinking to the sound of their breaths. When he finally stood, wincing, she helped him inside, one arm around his waist. Inside the house, she cleaned his wound as best she could. He hissed when the whiskey touched it, muttering a curse under his breath. She almost laughed through her tears. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he murmured, "but I'm still here." When she finished, he caught her hand before she could pull away. "Clara!" She met his gaze, and the words he'd been holding back for days broke free. "You don't have to run anymore. Not from him. Not from your past. You're safe here. With me." Her breath trembled. "I don't know how to live without running." "Then we'll learn together." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "You can't promise me that it'll be easy." "I ain't," he whispered. "Just that it'll be real." Outside, the last of the wind died, and the world fell quiet. For the first time since she'd fled Santa Fe, Clara felt the weight of fear slip from her shoulders. In its place came something new, something she hadn't dared to believe in: hope. She kissed him then, soft and trembling. His hand rose to her cheek, rough thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. The kiss deepened, slow and certain, the kind that felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming. When they finally pulled apart, the fire crackled low, casting warm light over them both. "Reckon that sheriff won't be bothering anyone for a while," Samuel said with a faint smile. "No," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "But even if he did, I wouldn't hide again." He smiled. Pride and tenderness mingled in his eyes. "That's my girl." She laughed through her tears, and he drew her close, holding her against his heart as the night deepened outside. Beyond the window, the plains stretched endless and quiet. The storm had passed. The danger had come and gone. And in its wake, under the soft hum of the crickets and the scent of rain still lingering in the dirt, two souls that had once been lost found each other at last. The land breathed easy again. So did they. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew the truth in their bones. This was not the end, but the beginning of something that would outlast every storm the world could bring. The days that followed passed like the slow turning of a new season. The dust from the gunfight had long settled, but its echoes still lingered around the ranch like ghosts unwilling to leave. Samuel healed slowly, the wound on his shoulder closing under Clara's careful hands. Each morning she cleaned the bandage, her touch gentle but sure, and each evening they sat by the fire, speaking little yet saying everything that needed to be said in the silence between them. Life had begun to find rhythm again. The horses returned to their calm ways. The fences stood mended. The air felt lighter somehow, as though the land itself had decided to let out the breath it had been holding for too long. Clara had taken to wearing one of Samuel's shirts most days, sleeves rolled high, her hair tied with a scrap of old linen. She moved through the ranch like she belonged there, as though she'd been part of its quiet heart all along. One morning, as the first warmth of spring began to stir the soil, Samuel stood by the porch and watched her hanging freshly washed linens across the line. The wind tugged at the cloth, filling it like sails, and for a moment he imagined they might both be carried off somewhere far from memory or fear. She caught him watching and smiled, sunlight spilling across her face. It was a smile that made something in him ache, soft, alive, and full of peace he hadn't known he was missing. "You're staring," she said. He smirked faintly. "Reckon I am. You could help me, you know. Seems to me you're doing just fine without me." "Maybe," she said, laughing softly. "But it's nicer when you're beside me." That simple truth cut deeper than any bullet. He set his gloves aside and went to her, helping lift another damp sheet onto the line. Their hands brushed, lingering for a second too long before she turned away, cheeks flushed. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything that had been sitting heavy in his chest since the day she rode into his storm, but the words caught somewhere between pride and fear. So he said nothing and went back to work. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the wind turned warm, Samuel rode into town for supplies. Clara stayed behind, mending shirts by the fire, though she couldn't shake the worry that followed him every time he disappeared beyond the ridge. She had learned to live without looking over her shoulder, but part of her still listened for trouble in the quiet, footsteps where there shouldn't be any, the echo of hooves too close, the memory of a man's cruel voice calling her name. The town itself had changed too. Folks greeted Samuel differently now. Some nodded with respect, others with the kind of cautious admiration that came when a man stood his ground against power. Word of what happened with the sheriff had spread faster than the wind could carry it. The people knew, and though Samuel didn't care much for talk, it did his heart good to know the truth had found its way into the open. The sheriff was gone, locked away awaiting trial down south, and for once, justice had sided with the right kind of man. He returned home by dusk, the sky painted in strokes of rose and gold. Clara was on the porch waiting, a lantern glowing beside her. When she saw him, her shoulders eased with relief. She met him halfway down the path, hands brushing the dust from his coat before she could stop herself. "Did anyone bother you?" she asked. He shook his head. "Town's quiet. Too quiet, maybe." "That's a good thing." "Usually," he said, "but quiet never lasts long in the West." They ate dinner together, the kind of simple meal that felt sacred in its peace. When the plates were cleared, Samuel stepped outside for air, staring at the open plains where the stars were beginning to bloom. He could hear Clara humming inside, that same tune she'd sung since the first morning he found her in his barn. It wasn't loud or fancy, just soft, like a prayer she didn't know she was saying. He closed his eyes and let it settle over him. When he came back in, she was by the window, the fire painting her in gold. "You think we'll ever leave this place?" she asked suddenly. He paused, leaning against the doorframe. "You want to?" "I don't know," she said. "Part of me feels safe here. Another part of me wonders what's beyond all this. I spent so many years locked away, I almost forgot what the world looked like. Now that I can breathe again, I don't know where to go." Samuel walked closer, his boots soft against the floorboards. "You could go anywhere. Start fresh. Folks in Santa Fe won't come looking for you anymore." She looked up at him then, eyes reflecting the firelight. "What about you?" He hesitated, the answer caught in his throat. "I ain't much for starting over." "You already did," she said quietly, "when you found me." The silence that followed was different this time, warmer, heavier with all the things that had been left unsaid. He stepped closer until the space between them disappeared, and for a heartbeat, the world outside seemed to stop. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Clara," he whispered. She met his gaze, her voice trembling. "Yes?" He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a sudden knock at the door startled them both. He turned sharply, hand instinctively going for his rifle. Clara froze, eyes wide. The knock came again, louder. Samuel approached slowly, every step measured. "Who's there?" a familiar voice answered from the other side. "Easy, Hayes. Just me." It was old Bill Carter, the rancher from town, who'd stood up during the gunfight weeks ago. Samuel lowered his weapon and opened the door. Bill stood there, hat in hand, his face lined and serious. "Evening, Bill," Samuel said. "What brings you out here this late?" "News," Bill replied. "Thought you'd want to hear it from me before the wind carried it wrong. The sheriff, he didn't make it." Samuel's jaw tightened. "When?" "2 nights ago. Tried to break loose on the way to trial. Took a bullet to the chest. Didn't last till sunrise." Clara had stepped into the doorway behind him, her breath catching. Bill's eyes softened when he saw her. "I figured you'd want to know. Folks in town say it's justice. Me? I say it's just over." Samuel nodded slowly. "Appreciate you telling me." Bill tipped his hat. "Take care of her, Hayes. You both earned some peace." Then he turned and rode off into the dark. For a long moment, neither Samuel nor Clara spoke. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain. She stepped closer, her hand finding his arm. "It's done then," she said softly. "It's done," he repeated. She let out a shaky breath. "I thought I'd feel free when he was gone, but now I just feel empty." He turned to face her, his voice low. "That's because freedom ain't quiet, Clara. It's loud. It takes time to learn how to live with it." Her eyes glistened. "Will you help me learn?" He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "If you'll have me." She smiled through her tears. "I already do." He drew her close, wrapping his good arm around her, and for the first time since the storm that brought her to his door, she felt completely safe. No more hiding, no more running. Just the sound of his heart beneath her ear, and the steady rhythm of life beginning again. Days turned into weeks, and spring unfolded across the plains like a promise kept. The fields turned green, wildflowers blooming in places long left barren. Samuel's shoulder healed fully, leaving only a pale scar. Clara tended the garden, learned to ride proper, laughed when he teased her for talking to the horses like they were kin. They worked side by side, shared quiet meals, and built something that neither dared to call love until the truth became too obvious to deny. One evening, Samuel disappeared for a few hours. When he returned, the sun was sinking low, and Clara was sitting on the porch, her hair glowing in the orange light. He walked toward her, something hidden in his hand. "What's that?" she asked, smiling. He sat beside her and opened his palm. Resting there was the ring, the same one she had dropped that stormy night, now polished clean and glinting softly in the fading light. Her breath caught. "You kept it." "Couldn't bring myself to throw it away." She reached out, fingers trembling as she touched the gold. "It's cursed with a promise I never wanted." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time to make a new one." Her eyes lifted to his, wide and uncertain. "Samuel." He took a slow breath, the kind a man takes before stepping into something he knows he can't turn back from. "Clara Whitmore, I ain't the kind of man who makes pretty speeches or promises I can't keep, but you came here and tore down walls I thought would never fall. You made this place feel alive again. You made me alive again. So I'm asking, you, don't run anymore. Stay with me." Her tears came then, soft and shining in the twilight. "You don't need to ask, Samuel. You already have my answer." He smiled, relief and love breaking across his face like sunlight after rain. He slid the ring onto her finger, once a symbol of fear, now reborn as something whole. She looked down at it, the gold gleaming against her skin, and then back at him. "This time," she said softly, "it fits." He laughed quietly, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. "Guess it was meant to." That night, they danced under the open sky, no music but the wind and the sound of their laughter. The stars hung bright above them, watching silently as two souls, once broken by loss and fear, found their way home in each other's arms. As the night deepened, Clara rested her head on Samuel's shoulder, whispering, "You ever wonder what people say about us someday?" He smiled. "Don't much care, long as they say we lived." She laughed, the sound carrying out over the plains, mingling with the hum of crickets and the soft rustle of grass. The land stretched endless around them, but for the first time, neither felt small against it. They belonged to it and to each other. And as the wind carried the last whisper of the old world away, Samuel Hayes pulled the woman he loved closer, kissed her beneath the stars, and knew that the storm that had brought her into his life hadn't been a curse at all. It had been grace, wild, fierce, and free. The world was quiet again, but this time it was the good kind of quiet, the kind that meant peace and love, and a life waiting to be lived. And somewhere deep in that silence, the ring on her finger caught the light and shone, bright, steady, and everlasting. In the wide and untamed lands of the Wild West, storms often brought more than thunder and rain. For Samuel Hayes and Clara Whitmore, one storm brought redemption, courage, and a love that refused to die. Two hearts once broken by loss and fear found a home in each other's arms, proving that sometimes the fiercest battles are not fought with guns, but with forgiveness, faith, and the will to begin again. If you enjoyed this heart-stirring tale of love, courage, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every story rides on the wind of passion and the promise of hope. Saddle up, and don't miss the next story waiting just beyond the horizon.